When she reached the age of 97, the decision wasn't easy. It never is when a person has lived nearly an entire lifetime in the same place. The house was more than just four walls and a roof. It was a testament to decades of memories, to a life full of stories, love, and losses. It had witnessed laughter and tears, parties and quiet nights, moments of joy and times of sorrow. But time had a way of making everything feel smaller. The creaky floors seemed louder now. The narrow hallways, once filled with the bustle of family, felt long and lonely. She had lived in the house for most of her life, first as a young bride with her husband, then as a mother watching her children grow. But now, with her family spread far and wide and her health not what it once was, the house felt like a weight. She was tired of keeping it up, tired of maintaining the garden, tired of the space that was no longer useful. It was with a heavy heart that she made the decision. She would sell the house. The idea of moving into a retirement community seemed like the only sensible option. She needed to be around people, she needed help, and she could no longer manage everything on her own. It wasn't just the physical work, it was the emotional toll, too. Over the years, the house had become her sanctuary, her refuge. After the passing of her husband, it was all she had left of their life together. The rooms had been filled with memories, some happy, some bittersweet. Each picture on the wall, each piece of furniture, each room told a story of her life, of the life they had shared. But now, standing in the hallway looking at the old furniture, the family portraits on the walls, and the photos of children who had long since moved out, she knew it was time to let go. Her children had suggested moving for a while now. They were concerned about her living alone in such a large house. But they didn't understand. How could they? They had their own families, their own lives. For her, the house had been a place where the years had passed like a slow river, each one leaving its mark. It was her home, a piece of her. But now the years had become too heavy and the house too big for just one person. She picked up the phone and called the real estate agent. It was a young woman, Claire, who answered. Claire had been a friend of a friend and had been helping people in the area sell their homes for a few years now. Her voice was friendly, but there was a certain hesitance in it when she spoke to Ms. Davis. Claire had heard about the house. It was old, a bit run down, and definitely not the easiest property to sell. But Ms. Davis was clear. She didn't need much. She didn't need the house to be perfect. She just needed to move on, to simplify her life. When Claire agreed to help, they set up a time for her to come over. The day Claire arrived, the old house seemed to groan under the weight of its years. The large Victorian-style home stood proudly in the middle of the quiet neighborhood, but even from the outside, it looked tired. The white paint, once bright, had faded to a dull shade. The front gate was rusted in spots, and the garden, which had once been a picture of beauty, was now overgrown with weeds. Claire hesitated at the front door. She had seen this before. Old houses, well-loved but not well-maintained. But what struck her most as she rang the bell was the silence. She had expected to hear the sounds of life from inside, children playing, the hum of a family moving around. But there was only the sound of wind rustling the leaves outside. The door creaked open slowly, and there she was, Miss Davis, as fragile as a bird, her steps slow but steady. She smiled warmly as she invited Claire in. It was a strange feeling walking through the door. Claire had been in plenty of homes before, but there was something different about this one. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to reveal its secrets. Come in, Ms. Davis said, her voice soft but strong. I've lived here a long time, and there's a lot to see. Claire followed her through the darkened hallway, the wooden floors creaking under their feet. The house smelled of old books and dust, a comforting smell that made Claire feel like she was stepping back in time. It was immediately clear to Claire that this house had been a beautiful place once, but now it was tired, worn out. The furniture was old, the wallpaper peeling in places, the curtains faded from the sun. Still, there was a charm to it, an undeniable warmth that seemed to have settled into every corner. Ms. Davis led Claire through the living room, showing her the large fireplace, the heavy curtains, the paintings that hung on the walls. There were family photos everywhere. Wedding pictures, pictures of children who had grown up and left, and pictures of long-lost friends. It was clear that this was more than just a house, it was a life. I had it all, Ms. Davis said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. A family, a beautiful home, everything I could have asked for. It was my world. Claire didn't know how to respond. She had expected to hear something about the condition of the house, something about repairs or maintenance, but instead, Ms. Davis was talking about a past that felt almost too distant to touch. It was clear now. This house was more than just bricks and wood. It was a memory, a treasure chest of years long gone. As they walked through the rooms, Claire began to notice more oddities. The furniture was old, yes, but it wasn't just ordinary. There were antiques, beautiful pieces of furniture that didn't belong to the typical mid-century decor that had become common in the neighborhood. A small, intricately carved table, a pair of antique chairs with velvet upholstery. Claire thought nothing of it at first. Perhaps Ms. Davis had collected these over the years, but then something caught her eye. On the mantel in the living room was a painting, a strange one unlike anything Claire had ever seen. It was dark, almost brooding, with heavy brushstrokes and an eerie atmosphere. It didn't fit with the rest of the home, with its comfortable old-fashioned style. "What's this?" Claire asked, her finger pointing to the painting. Ms. Davis smiled, though her eyes seemed distant for a moment, as though remembering something far away. "That," she said, "was a gift from a very old friend. A friend who meant a lot to me in my younger years." Claire wasn't sure what to make of it, but she knew one thing for sure. The house, though aged and run down, was filled with more than just dust. There was something more to it. There was a story here, one that she hadn't quite uncovered yet. She glanced around again, taking in the details. The framed letters on the wall, the bookshelves packed with old books, the drawers that were likely filled with trinkets and keepsakes from a life well lived. But it wasn't until they made their way to the upstairs that Claire began to understand. Ms. Davis led her up the stairs slowly, her feet shuffling along the worn steps. The upstairs was smaller, quieter. As they reached the top, Claire noticed a door that was slightly ajar. She could see shelves packed with old boxes, crates, and a faint hint of something metallic gleaming in the dim light. "Don't open that door just yet," Ms. Davis said, her voice suddenly firm. "There are things in there that belong to another time." Claire, startled by the sudden change in tone, didn't ask further. She had an inkling that she had only just begun to scratch the surface of this house's history. And so, as the day drew on, Claire knew that this wasn't going to be a typical sale. This house was full of secrets, secrets that, like Ms. Davis, had been hidden away for years, waiting to be discovered. The next morning, Claire arrived back at the house. She had spent the evening thinking about what she had seen the day before. It wasn't just the house that had struck her. It was Ms. Davis. The older woman, despite her frailty, had an air of quiet dignity about her. There was something about her, something that made Claire want to learn more. As Claire stepped out of her car and walked toward the front door, she couldn't help but feel that today would be different. She had come to do a job, show the house, help Ms. Davis get it ready for sale. But it seemed like the house had more to reveal. She rang the doorbell, and the familiar creak of the door echoed through the quiet house. "Good morning," Ms. Davis said, opening the door with a gentle smile. There was something about her smile that made Claire feel as if she were a visitor, invited into an old friend's home rather than a property for sale. "I hope I didn't interrupt anything," Claire said, stepping inside. "Oh, not at all," Ms. Davis replied. "I was just getting ready for the day. I've had plenty of time to think, you know." As they walked through the house together, Claire noticed that Ms. Davis seemed more relaxed now. There was a sense of comfort in her movements, as though the house had settled into her bones as much as she had settled into it. They passed through the living room, the smell of old wood and fresh flowers in the air. Ms. Davis gestured toward the large bookshelf that took up an entire wall. "I used to spend hours here reading. It's funny how much time we spend with things, and then one day they just don't matter anymore. My family, they moved on, and I suppose I never really thought about parting with it all," she said with a soft chuckle. Claire nodded, looking up at the rows of books. Some were old novels, some were biographies, and some were what appeared to be travel journals. The spines were worn, the paper yellowed with age. It was clear that Ms. Davis had loved them, read them, and perhaps even lived them. "Do you mind if I take a look?" Claire asked, reaching for a nearby book. "Please," Ms. Davis said, her voice almost wistful. "But be careful with the ones at the bottom. They're the oldest, and I'm afraid they might fall apart." Claire smiled and crouched down to take a book from the lower shelf. As her fingers brushed against the pages, a faint sense of history seemed to pulse through the room. This wasn't just a house, it was a record of a life. She opened the book, It was a journal handwritten in a neat looping script. Claire read a few lines, noticing that it was a travel diary. It spoke of places far away, Paris, Rome, Cairo, and described in vivid detail the sights, sounds, and smells of the streets. Claire glanced up at Ms. Davis, whose face had softened. "That was from my trip to Europe with my husband," she said quietly. "We were young and in love. It feels like a different life now." "I can only imagine," Claire said, closing the book gently and placing it back on the shelf. "Your life has been filled with so many experiences." Ms. Davis smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes now. "I've been thinking a lot about it lately," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the things I've kept, the things I've held on to. I suppose I've kept them for too long, haven't I?" Claire hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to be supportive, but she didn't want to push too hard. Instead, she decided to keep her tone light. "You know," Claire said, glancing at the room around them, "I think this house holds a lot of stories that the new owners might never know unless they look carefully." Ms. Davis turned toward her, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Perhaps," she said, "but maybe that's how it's meant to be. Some stories are meant to be forgotten. Some memories are meant to fade away." As they moved through the house, Claire noticed that the upstairs hallway seemed colder than the rest of the house. There were fewer personal touches here. No family photos, no knickknacks scattered around. The walls were lined with doors, each leading to rooms that had clearly been left untouched for some time. "I used to come up here to escape," Ms. Davis said, breaking the silence. "When the house was full of life, with children running around, this was the quiet place. My retreat." They came to the first room on the right, a small, unassuming door that Ms. Davis opened slowly. Inside, it looked like a bedroom, but it wasn't a bedroom at all. It was a small study. There was a desk covered in papers, a chair pushed against the wall, and bookshelves full of more journals and photographs. A faint smell of leather and paper lingered in the air. "This was my husband's study," Ms. Davis said softly, her voice almost a whisper now. "He used to sit here for hours, writing letters, reading newspapers. It's strange. After he passed, I didn't have the heart to move anything." Claire looked around the room, taking in the quiet atmosphere. It was as though time had stopped here. There was a sense of stillness in the room, as though the man who had once worked there still lingered. "Would you like me to help you clean it out?" Claire asked gently. Ms. Davis looked at her, her eyes flickering with emotion. "I think I've been avoiding it," she admitted. "It's hard to let go of the things that meant so much. But I'm tired now. I can't keep holding on to everything." They stood there for a moment in the silence of the room before Ms. Davis turned away. "Let's move on," she said. "I'll show you the attic." The attic door was at the far end of the hall, tucked away in a corner. As they climbed the narrow stairs, Claire could feel the dust settling in the air. It was musty up here, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. The attic was filled with old trunks, boxes, and furniture covered in faded sheets. It was like stepping into another time. The trunks were stacked in the corner, each one labeled in neat handwriting. "This was where we kept everything," Ms. Davis said, her voice taking on a nostalgic tone. "Old clothes, family heirlooms, keepsakes from our travels. I used to think I'd never need any of it, but now—" She trailed off, her voice fading. Claire didn't say anything. She was too busy looking around. She saw a large chest in the corner, its brass handles tarnished with age. There was something about it that seemed important. "Can I open it?" Claire asked. Ms. Davis gave her a small nod. Claire lifted the lid, and inside, she found what looked like a collection of old letters, tied together with a piece of string. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but there was something captivating about them. She carefully untied the string and pulled out a letter. As she read the first few lines, her eyes widened. The letter was dated from the 1940s, written in beautiful, flowing handwriting. It was a letter from someone Ms. Davis had clearly known well. "Who were these letters from?" Claire asked, looking up. "They were from an old friend," Ms. Davis said, her voice quieter than before. "Someone I haven't thought about in a long time." As Claire looked at the stack of letters, she realized something. These weren't just old papers, they were pieces of a life that had been tucked away, hidden for years. She set the letter down gently, closing the chest. "You've lived a remarkable life," Claire said, her voice full of respect. Ms. Davis smiled, though her eyes were far away. "I suppose we all do in our own way. It's just that some lives get remembered and others fade into the background." As Claire looked at the woman standing beside her, She couldn't help but feel that there was so much more to this house, and to Miss Davis, than she had first imagined. This wasn't just a house for sale. This was a home full of history, of stories waiting to be told. And Claire knew deep down that she had only just begun to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within these walls. The following days seemed to stretch on, but in a way that made Claire feel as though she were moving through a slow dance with time itself. Every visit to the house felt like peeling back layers, each revealing something more unexpected than the last. The house was full of surprises, hidden corners, old treasures, and stories that waited to be unearthed. Claire had come back to help Ms. Davis with the sale, but she was beginning to feel that this wasn't just a typical job. There was something deeply personal about this house, something that made it more than just property to be sold. The house had a life of its own, a quiet pulse that seemed to beat in time with the memories it held. On the third visit, Claire arrived with a sense of anticipation. She had no real idea of what she might uncover today, but she had learned not to expect the ordinary. As she stepped inside, Ms. Davis greeted her with a warm smile. Today she seemed more at ease, more open than before. "I've been thinking," Ms. Davis began, her voice soft. "I'd like to show you some of the things I've kept in the back room. They've been packed away for years, but I think it's time someone else sees them." Claire felt a spark of excitement. She hadn't expected anything more, but now Ms. Davis was offering to reveal more of the past, more pieces of a life she had lived. They walked down the hallway toward the back of the house. It was a room that Claire hadn't yet explored in detail. When they opened the door, Claire was greeted by the sight of neatly stacked boxes and shelves filled with items that looked both ancient and priceless. The room smelled of old wood and dust, the kind of scent that clung to things that had been untouched for decades. "Take a look at this," Ms. Davis said, her voice a little lighter now. She pulled a box down from the shelf, its edges worn and frayed from age. "These are the things my husband and I collected when we were younger. He had a love for fine art, and I had a love for everything else." Inside the box were framed paintings, old photographs, and pieces of jewelry. The jewelry glinted softly in the dim light, and Claire's breath caught as she took in the intricate designs. Some of the pieces looked old, maybe even antique. They were delicate, carefully crafted, and each one seemed to hold a story of its own. "These are beautiful," Claire said, her fingers gently tracing the edge of a golden necklace. It was old-fashioned, yet timeless, with small, sparkling gemstones embedded in the design. "Do you mind if I ask where you found them?" Ms. Davis smiled, a small, wistful smile. "Some were gifts. Others, well, we traveled a lot in our younger years. My husband loved to find rare things, beautiful things. He thought they should be shared with the world." As Claire listened, she began to realize just how much of a traveler Ms. Davis had been in her youth. The house, with its quiet, hidden corners, had held more than just memories of family. It had been a sanctuary for two people who had loved the world and filled their home with pieces of it. Ms. Davis opened another box, this one filled with old letters. Some were neatly tied with twine, while others were scattered, their edges curling with age. She picked one up carefully as if it were a treasure and handed it to Claire. "Read this," she said softly. "It's from a very old friend." Claire unfolded the letter with care, the paper yellowed and fragile in her hands. It was written in flowing handwriting, words that spoke of adventures in far-off lands and long conversations by candlelight. As Claire read, she could almost hear the voice of the person who had written it, the warmth and affection that had filled the lines of the letter. "I remember him," Ms. Davis said, her voice distant. "He was a close friend, someone I met when I was in Paris. We shared a love for the arts and we kept in touch for many years. But like many things, the letters stopped. Life got in the way. People drift apart. The letter spoke of travels, of exhibitions, of a shared passion for culture. But there was something else in the letter, too. A sense of loss, of time that had passed too quickly. It's a strange thing, isn't it?" Ms. Davis continued. "How life takes us in so many directions. We make connections, we form friendships, and then one day those connections just fade. I suppose that's what happens. Time moves forward and you can't hold on to everything." Claire looked at the letter again, feeling the weight of those words. They weren't just about a friendship. They were about the inevitable nature of time, about how nothing lasts forever. As she set the letter back in the box, she couldn't help but wonder how much Ms. Davis had seen, how many friends she had loved and lost. The house, with all its memories and objects, seemed like a map of her life, each item a marker of a place, a person, or a time that had once meant something. "Where did you get this one?" Claire asked, picking up a delicate silver bracelet from the box. The bracelet was adorned with small, intricate charms, tiny symbols that seemed to tell a story of their own. "That one," Ms. Davis said, "was from a trip to Egypt. My husband and I went there after we were married. It was one of the most wonderful trips we ever took. We saw the pyramids, the Nile, and the markets where people sold their crafts. This bracelet was made by a woman who was selling it in a small shop. I bought it on a whim, and I've never let go of it." The memory in Ms. Davis's voice was clear. There was something timeless about the way she spoke of her adventures, a reminder that even though the world had changed, her love for those experiences had remained constant. "I can't believe how much you've experienced," Claire said, her voice full of awe. "These stories, they're incredible." Ms. Davis chuckled softly. "It doesn't feel incredible to me anymore. It just feels like life. But yes, I suppose I've had a good one. I've traveled, met people, loved and lost. It's all part of the journey." As Claire sorted through more of the boxes, she found more letters, more jewelry, and more mementos of a life well lived. Each item seemed to hold a story, a fragment of history that had been carefully preserved. There were postcards from places Claire had only heard of in books, photos of Ms. Davis and her husband in places Claire couldn't even imagine visiting. The more Claire uncovered, the more she began to understand that this house, with all its old things, was not just a home, it was a treasure chest of memories. A place where a lifetime had been carefully catalogued, and yet, amidst all these treasures, there was a sense of sadness that Claire couldn't ignore. It was as though the treasures were reminders of a past that could never be recaptured. They were beautiful, yes, but they were also heavy. They weighed down on Ms. Davis, and Claire could see it in the way she spoke, in the way her fingers lingered on the objects she had once cherished. As Claire stood there, looking at the treasures laid out before her, she felt a deep sense of respect for Ms. Davis. This wasn't just a sale. This wasn't just about getting rid of old things. It was about letting go of a life that had been full and rich and beautiful, but one that was now coming to an end. For Ms. Davis, the house had been a place of memories, a safe haven where the pieces of her past could live on. But for Claire, the house had become something else, a reminder of the passage of time, of how things change, of how we all have to let go eventually. "I think I'm ready," Ms. Davis said, breaking the silence. "Ready to let go of all this. Ready to pass it on. It's time." Claire looked at her, understanding more than ever that this wasn't just about selling a house. It was about something deeper, something more meaningful. And as the day came to a close, Claire realized that Ms. Davis had already given her something far more valuable than any treasure. She had given her a glimpse into a life, a story, that would stay with her forever. The weeks began to blend together, and Claire found herself returning to the house more often than she had anticipated. What started as a job, helping Ms. Davis sell her home, had evolved into something more personal, almost sacred. Every time Claire walked through the door, she felt as though she was stepping into a world that few ever saw. The house, its creaky floors, its rooms filled with stories, was a place where the past wasn't just remembered. It was alive. Ms. Davis seemed to be at peace with her decision, though it wasn't easy for her. Some days she seemed light, almost eager to pass on the treasures that had filled her home. But on others there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, as if she were saying goodbye to something that had been a part of her for so long. Claire could see the struggle, letting go of a lifetime's worth of memories, of love and loss, of all the things that had made her who she was. It wasn't just the house that had witnessed her life. It was the objects inside it, the delicate trinkets, the old letters, the travel souvenirs. All of them were tokens of a world that had shaped her. Claire had learned to appreciate the value in these items, not just for their material worth, but for the memories they carried. One chilly morning, as Claire arrived at the house, she was greeted by a phone call from Ms. Davis. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost fragile. "Claire," Ms. Davis said, "I was wondering if you could come over today. There's something I want to show you." Claire felt her heart skip a beat. She had grown so used to the quiet routine of these visits, going through old boxes, reminiscing about past travels, and slowly packing up the remnants of a life lived. What could Ms. Davis possibly want to show her now? "I'll be right there," Claire replied, grabbing her coat and heading out the door. When she arrived, the door was already open, and Ms. Davis was waiting for her in the entryway. There was a sense of urgency in her demeanor, a quiet tension that Claire hadn't seen before. "I'm so glad you're here," Ms. Davis said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking about something for days. I want to show you something I've never shown anyone. It's been hidden away for so long." Claire's curiosity piqued. She followed Ms. Davis down the hall to a door she had never noticed before. It was tucked away at the far end of the house, nearly forgotten, as though it didn't belong. The door was old, its wood worn and cracked from age. Ms. Davis reached out and touched the handle, taking a moment before turning it. Inside, the room was small, smaller than most of the others in the house, but there was something striking about it. It felt different, more personal, more intimate. The walls were lined with old pictures, each one carefully framed, each one telling a story of days long past. A faint smell of lavender and dust hung in the air. "This was my husband's study," Ms. Davis said softly, almost reverently. "Before he got ill, this was where he spent most of his time. And after? Well, after he passed, I couldn't bring myself to do anything with it." The room was a reflection of a man Claire had never met, but whom she could now imagine so vividly. The desk was cluttered with papers, old pens, and an open book, as though it had been left in the middle of an idea. The bookshelves were full of volumes that looked well read, their spines cracked and worn. On the far wall there was a large portrait, an older painting of a man and woman standing side by side. The woman was Ms. Davis, but the man in the painting was not someone Claire had seen before. "That's him," Ms. Davis said, following Claire's gaze to the portrait. "My husband." Claire was struck by the warmth in the painting. The couple seemed so alive, so full of energy. Despite the fact that the portrait had been painted many years ago, they looked so happy, so full of promise. "Did you two paint this together?" Claire asked, her voice quiet. Ms. Davis shook her head. "No, a friend of his did. He was an artist, one of the few who really understood him. He was the one who captured that moment. The way he looked at me, the way we were. It's strange, isn't it? To see yourself in a painting, to remember a time that's long gone." The sadness in her voice was unmistakable, but there was also something else, a sense of longing, of a love that had been lost but still held tightly in her heart. Claire could see it now, in the way Ms. Davis spoke about her husband, in the way she paused in the room, letting her fingers drift across the edge of a bookshelf as though she were remembering the touch of his hand. "I've kept this room just as it was," Ms. Davis continued. "I think that's why it's been so hard for me to move on. This room holds all of him, the man he was before he became ill, the man he was before." She trailed off, her voice faltering. For a moment, the room was filled with an aching silence. Claire wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt inadequate. How could she possibly understand the depth of the grief, the weight of the memories that Ms. Davis carried? Instead, she simply nodded, her heart heavy. "It must be hard," she said softly. Ms. Davis looked up at her, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "It is, but I've realized something lately. I can't keep holding on to everything. I need to let go." As Claire looked around the room, she saw what Ms. Davis meant. The space was full of memories, some beautiful, some painful, but all deeply important. There was a sense of preservation here, a feeling that time had been paused. But time, Claire knew, was relentless. It kept moving forward whether we were ready or not. "There's one last thing I want to show you," Ms. Davis said, her voice steady again. She walked over to a small cabinet in the corner of the room and opened it slowly. Inside was a collection of old letters, each one tied with a ribbon. They looked as though they had been stored carefully, preserved for a time when someone would need to read them again. "These letters," Ms. Davis began, "were written by my husband. He wrote them to me every year, on our anniversary. I haven't read them in years. I've kept them locked away because, well, I didn't want to face the emotions they would stir up." Claire could feel the weight of the letters in the room, even before she touched them. They were more than just words on paper. They were the last remnants of a love that had shaped this house, this life. "Would you like to read one?" Ms. Davis asked, her voice gentle. Claire nodded, feeling a deep respect for the privacy that Ms. Davis had offered her. She carefully picked up the first letter, untied the ribbon, and opened it. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, flowing, full of emotion. It was a letter from the past, written on an anniversary many years ago. Claire read the first few lines, feeling the warmth of the words settle in her chest. "My dearest love," the letter began. "Another year has passed, and yet my heart feels as full as it did when I first met you. Every day with you is a blessing, and I cherish every moment we share. The years may have brought change, but they have never taken away the love we have for each other." As Claire read on, she could almost hear the voice of the man who had written the words. He had written them with love, with care, with a promise that would last a lifetime. "I had no idea he wrote these," Claire said, looking up at Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis smiled faintly. "He did every year. He said it was his way of reminding me that no matter what happened, no matter how much time passed, his love for me would never fade." Claire looked at the letter again, this time with new understanding. These weren't just words. They were a part of the fabric of Ms. Davis's life, woven into the story of who she was. "I think," Claire said slowly, "that these letters are a part of your story, a part of your life, and maybe it's time to share them." Ms. Davis met her gaze, and for the first time Claire saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Maybe you're right," she said softly.
Maybe it's time. And as Claire sat there holding one of the letters, she realized that she had learned something important.
The house wasn't just a collection of rooms and objects, it was a living memory. It was a testament to the love and loss, the joys and sorrows, of a life that had been well lived. And in that moment, Claire understood that the house, just like the letters, would never truly be gone. It would always be a part of Miss Davis, just as she would always be a part of it. As the days continued to pass, the process of selling the house began to move toward its inevitable conclusion. Yet it was clear that neither Claire nor Ms. Davis was quite ready to let go, though they both understood it was a necessity. The house, with all its treasures and memories, had become a symbol of the past that they were both reluctant to part with. But despite the sadness that came with leaving it behind, Claire saw something changing in Ms. Davis. There was a new sense of acceptance in the older woman's eyes, a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. It was as though she was finally making peace with her decision, realizing that sometimes letting go wasn't about losing everything. It was about giving yourself the space to live what remained. One evening, just a few days before the house was set to be listed on the market, Claire received a call from Ms. Davis. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Claire, I've made my decision," Ms. Davis said. "I'm ready. Ready to move forward. Ready to part with the house. I think it's time for me to find a new place to call home." The words hit Claire harder than she expected. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it aloud made it all the more real. She knew it wasn't easy for Ms. Davis, but this was the first time Claire heard such finality in her voice. It wasn't just about selling a house. It was about moving forward with her life, despite the grief of what she was leaving behind. "I'll be there tomorrow morning to help you pack up the last of it," Claire said, trying to keep her own emotions in check. "We'll get everything ready for the sale." But Ms. Davis hesitated before replying. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "I've been thinking a lot, and I've come to a decision. I want you to help me with one last thing." Claire was intrigued, wondering what Ms. Davis could possibly want now. "Of course, anything," she replied. "I've decided I want to keep some of the things, the really special things, the ones that hold memories of him, of us. But not just that. I want to leave something behind in the house before it's sold. Something that will keep the memory of it alive. Something that will pass on the love it's seen, the life it's held." Claire didn't speak right away. She knew what Ms. Davis meant. This house had seen more than just the years. It had seen a lifetime's worth of experiences, love and laughter. It was more than just walls and rooms. It was a part of Ms. Davis, a part of her soul. "What do you want to leave behind?" Claire asked softly. "I want to leave a piece of my heart here," Ms. Davis said, her voice filled with resolve. "But I want it to be something that will carry on after I'm gone. Something that will outlast me." For the first time, Claire felt the full weight of the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. This wasn't just about finding a buyer for the house anymore. This was about helping Ms. Davis create a lasting legacy, about ensuring that the house's story would continue to be told, even when she herself wasn't around to tell it. The next morning, Claire arrived at the house a little earlier than usual. The air had a crispness to it, the early rays of sun casting a golden glow through the windows. The house was still the same, yet it felt different, like something important was about to happen. Ms. Davis was already waiting for her, dressed in a soft cardigan, her eyes a little brighter than they had been before. Come with me, Ms. Davis said, leading her to the back garden. The garden had been well kept over the years, though it had started to show signs of age. The flowers, though faded, still held on to their color, and the trees in the backyard stood tall as if guarding the house from the outside world. In the center of the garden stood an old stone bench, one that had clearly been there for many years. "This is where we used to sit," Ms. Davis said, her voice softening as she looked at the bench. "My husband and I, we would sit here for hours, just talking. The days would pass and we didn't care. It was our place of peace, our little world." Claire could feel the emotion in the air, thick and heavy. "Do you want to leave something here?" Claire asked, understanding now what Ms. Davis had meant the night before. Ms. Davis nodded slowly. "Yes. I want to leave something that will remind anyone who comes here that this place was full of life, full of love. I want it to be remembered even after I'm gone." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. It was old, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings, the kind of box that you would expect to find in a treasure chest. She handed it to Claire. "I want you to bury this here under the bench. This box. It holds the things that were most important to me. Letters, photographs, pieces of jewelry, and other small things that were part of our life together. It's my way of leaving behind a part of myself." Claire was overwhelmed by the trust Ms. Davis was placing in her. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about preserving a piece of history, a piece of someone's heart. "I'll do it," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure it's taken care of." Ms. Davis smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you. You've been such a help to me, Claire. I don't know what I would have done without you." Claire gently opened the box just enough to glimpse the contents. It was filled with small personal items, faded photographs of happy moments, love letters that had been written many years ago, a silver locket, and a few other keepsakes that told the story of a life shared. "I'll bury it here," Claire said, carefully placing the box back inside. "And it will stay here, safe, just as it has been for all these years." Together they dug a small hole beneath the bench and Claire placed the box inside. She covered it gently with soil, the earth seeming to embrace it like an old friend. When the hole was filled, the garden seemed to settle into a new quiet, as though it too understood the significance of the moment. "We've done it," Ms. Davis said, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "It's done. And now I'm ready," Claire nodded. She felt a sense of finality, but also of peace. Ms. Davis had found a way to preserve what mattered most to her, even as she prepared to move on. The rest of the day passed in a quiet haze. They finished packing up the last few things from the house, and Claire helped Ms. Davis sort through what was left. They shared a few more stories, laughed about old memories, and even shed a few more tears. But there was no bitterness anymore. No regrets. It was simply time to move forward. When the last box was packed and the house stood empty, Claire and Ms. Davis stood together on the front porch, looking out over the place that had been home for so long. "Thank you for everything," Ms. Davis said, her voice steady now. "You helped me let go in a way I never thought possible. You gave me the strength to move on." Claire smiled softly. "It's been an honor. You've shown me so much more than I ever expected." And as Claire left the house for the final time, she couldn't help but feel that, even though the house would soon belong to someone else, the spirit of it, the love, the memories, the life it had contained would never truly leave. It would stay there, hidden under the bench in the garden, a secret waiting to be discovered by whoever called the house their own. Ms. Davis had passed on more than just a house. She had passed on the stories of a life well lived, and Claire would carry them with her always.